Hello and welcome to World News on the Hour here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Talks on Ukraine in Paris were excellent and signal that Europeans are once again back at the negotiating table when it comes to Kyiv's future. That's according to the French Foreign Minister following a meeting between US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and European and Ukrainian officials. After the talks, Rubio spoke to reporters at the airport about his thoughts on the future of the war.
Following on from US talks in Paris with French officials and Ukrainian officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has implied that the US is potentially prepared to walk away from these negotiations should they not find some meaningful, tangible progress on ceasefire discussions within the next few days. Let's take a listen to what Marco Rubio had to say.
We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides. As you know, Ambassador Witkoff has had not one, not two, but 3 meetings with Vladimir Putin to determine the Russian perspective on this and understand what it would take for them to end it. We, through General Kellogg, myself and others, have had repeated engagements with the Ukrainians. So we came here yesterday to sort of begin to talk about more specific outlines of what it might take to end a war, to try to figure out very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is the war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done. You know, we'll do what we can on the margins. We'll be ready to help whenever you're ready to have peace. But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end.
So those words from Rubio there implying that the situation is not as excellent as the French side seem to believe those talks went, showing that the US believes that these talks aren't going necessarily in the direction that the Trump administration was hoping they would go in when they began the process of speaking to the Russians and the Ukrainians about a ceasefire deal. Some also concerning comments from the Ukrainians made by Rubio, talking about European sanctions on Russia needing to be lifted for any kind of agreement with Russia and expecting the Europeans to be willing to lift those sanctions on Russia in exchange for no concessions that have been highlighted by Rubio there, just exchanging the sanctions relief for a ceasefire, one that would potentially leave the Russians in control of large parts of Ukraine that they have conquered through armed force. So it's a difficult position for the Ukrainians to be in here, and a difficult position for the Europeans to be in here, particularly if they're having pressure put on them by Washington to lift these sanctions for Russia in exchange for very little in return for continued guarantees for Ukraine's security. So look, the Americans are expressing a growing sense of frustration with how these talks are unfolding. Certainly not the 24-hour process that Donald Trump insisted he could stick to on the campaign trail. And now the US are threatening to walk away from the peace process altogether if they do not see tangible progress. However, it still remains that they only seem to be applying any pressure on the Ukrainians. Still no word whatsoever on any pressure being applied to the Russians. Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal will travel to Washington next week to meet with US Treasury Department Secretary Scott Bessent for talks on finalizing a deal on the Reconstruction Investment Fund with the US. Shmyhal's visit to Washington will begin on Monday, April 21st. Negotiating teams are expected to report on the progress by April 26th, with the aim of completing discussions by that date and signing as soon as possible, reads the Memorandum of Intent between the US and Ukraine. According to the document, both countries intend to establish a Reconstruction Investment Fund as part of an economic partnership between Kyiv and Washington, and held productive technical discussions in Washington, D.C. on April 11th to 12th, 2025. Despite the lack of concrete outcomes, the talks between the United States and Europe were good PR and politically important for Europe, Romain Lequinu told TVP World. The Euro Creative managing director added that President Macron asserted a leadership role and has notably hardened his stance on Russia since before the full-scale invasion.
At the moment, we can say that this visit is productive for the simple reason that it's important to talk and it's important for Europeans to be at the table of the negotiations. So this is also, we have to say it, a good PR movement. We know that the US is trying to show that there is progress on the negotiations. So this is favorable to them also. President Macron and France are very clear. We are not anymore in 2022 and before 2022, where it was very ambiguous from Paris what we heard about Putin, what we heard about Russia. Now Macron is clear. Russia is the aggressor. Russia needs to be defeated in Ukraine, because if not, this will be a problem for Europe. France is back also because there is clearly a vacuum of leadership. There has been a vacuum of leadership at the level of the European Union. And President Macron has been skilled enough to basically play this role, even if we have to acknowledge that this role is not easy to play for Macron, because the domestic political situation in France is far from being perfect.
In the early hours of Friday morning, Russia launched a missile strike on Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, targeting civilian infrastructure.
Ukrainian authorities report that one person was killed in the attack and 82 were wounded, including 6 children. Apartment buildings and business facilities were damaged in the strike.
A production enterprise was heavily damaged. It has nothing to do with the military. It's a civilian enterprise.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attack and offered his condolences.
This is how Russia began this Good Friday, with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, Shaheds, maiming our people and cities.
Friday's attack was yet another Russian strike on civilian infrastructure in recent weeks. In April alone, more than 60 civilians were killed in Ukraine as a result of Russian strikes.
The International Criminal Court has opened an inquiry into Hungary for failing to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It comes as Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban rolled out the red carpet for the Israeli leader despite an ICC arrest warrant for crimes against humanity issued against him. We're joined live by our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, from Brussels. Angela, what can you tell us about this filing?
Yes, so the Hague-based institution issued that petition on Wednesday, and according to those legal documents, it invites the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. It demands for him to provide an explanation as to why Hungary did not arrest the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when that leader visited Budapest for a state visit on the 6th of April. Now, a deadline has been set for Viktor Orban for the 27th of May to provide that explanation. But what we've heard from that leader is that he defended his decision not to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that this decree was not formalised in the parliament in Budapest. And during this visit, he even told local radio that Hungary would step away from the ICC. Now, Hungary is one of the founding members of the International Criminal Court, which investigates individuals for alleged crimes against humanity. But many have criticised the institution for not having much teeth unless a member state puts into force what that institution has declared. But as we said before, Viktor Orban has the 27th of May to respond to that alleged investigation. But that's all from us. I'll send it back to you in Warsaw.
Thank you very much indeed for that update, Angela. Hungary has been hit heavily by the 25% tariffs placed by the United States on vehicles and car parts produced in the European Union. But in an interview with a Hungarian online media outlet, Prime Minister Viktor Orban expressed optimism, saying that deals can be made with Washington that can offset the impact of the tariffs. He also suggested that the EU is to blame for Budapest's problems, rather than American President Donald Trump.
As far as we are concerned, we are in talks with the Americans about economic matters that would be in our advantage. The tariffs will be negative for us, but we negotiate about other economic deals to offset them. The reason why the Western world is surprised is that a US president came who does exactly what he promised. He fulfills his promises. And therefore, you knew exactly what was coming. I have known him for a long time, and I knew very well that he does what he says.
US Vice President J.D. Vance arrived in Rome on Good Friday for an official visit aimed at deepening ties between his country and Italy. Speaking ahead of bilateral talks with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Vance named the topics which will be high on the meeting's agenda, including Ukraine's ceasefire talks.
We have a couple of important issues to discuss today. I want to update the Prime Minister on some of the negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and also some of the things that have happened. Even in the past 24 hours, we think we have some interesting things to report on, of course, in private. So these negotiations, I won't prejudge them, but we do feel optimistic that we can hopefully bring this war, this very brutal war, to a close. I also, of course, want to talk to the Prime Minister about some of the economic relationships, very important between Italy and the United States. But, of course, we're having some big trade negotiations between not just Italy and the United States, but the whole European Union. We talked a great deal about that yesterday with the President, and we'll follow up on those conversations today.
Easter weekend has begun, but Poles travelling to the UK to celebrate will not be allowed to bring those famous Polish sausages back home. That's because the UK has banned meat and dairy from the European Union to prevent the dangerous foot and mouth disease from reaching the country. Our reporter Ovidiusz Nicheia is at Warsaw's Chopin Airport. Ovidiusz, are the passengers aware of these restrictions?
So most of the passengers we have asked here were aware of these restrictions. However, some were not. The UK has banned meat and dairy from the European Union. That's because of recent outbreaks of the disease in parts of the European Union. And people who try to bring such items to the UK will have them seized and destroyed by the authorities. But also in some cases, people face fines of up to £5,000. So it could prove very costly. Now, we have asked, since we've been here in the morning, there have been at least 2 planes flying to London. So we have asked people traveling there whether they're aware of these restrictions. Here's some of the answers.
I admit that I bring bread with me. It's a type of bread I know well. I'm sure about the quality, and I really enjoy it, especially Polish bread. I'm aware of the restrictions, and we do follow the rules. It's just that you can get whatever you want in the UK, so I don't feel the need to bring anything else with me. We like Polish cheese and meat. We're heading on a long trip and plan to eat local products. We are aware of the ban because we recently visited the UK.
But it's temporary, no? It's not like forever. So, well, let's wait to see if they actually do something with it.
So foot-and-mouth disease is a very dangerous disease for farm animals. It doesn't affect humans. And even though these products, these dairy and meat products are rather for human consumption, there is the risk of them being discarded somewhere, of animals reaching them, and therefore the UK authorities are trying to make sure that their animals are safe. There have been similar bans on similar products earlier from countries like Austria, Germany, Slovakia, and Hungary, where we have seen outbreaks of the disease. Now it's a ban on all European Union countries. That includes Poland. So if you're traveling from the European Union to the UK, make sure to not have any meat or dairy with you because it can be costly. Back to you, Ashim.
Thank you. Good advice from Ovidiusz Nicheia at Chopin Airport. And that brings us to the end of this news bulletin, but stay tuned, lots more coming up. Goodbye for now.